I don't so that's awesome. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon discussion here at the Steele Center. I'm Jamie Dow. I'm a professor of philosophy and the director of the Steele Center for the study of philosophy and religion. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Steele Center. The Steele Center was named after Dr. Marshall T. Steele, distinguished alumnus and president of the college from 1958 to 1969. It was made possible by a bequest of $1.5 million from Ruth VC. You might know that name. In 1977 to support programming that promotes the academic study of religion and philosophy on campus and beyond our campus. Our mission is to identify, clarify, and contribute to an understanding of the emerging philosophical and religious issues of our time. And the Steele Center hosts 2 speakers a year. We've hosted these discussions for over 45 years. And we also organize conferences sometimes. We support book groups on religion and philosophy. And recently that has been led by our Steele Center ambassadors who are here, Ayla, and David, and Bergen. And central to our mission is the engagement with big questions in the liberal arts. So in the mission, it actually says, we are dedicated to raising big questions in the liberal arts, which is on the topic. Since I became the director, the way I understood what we do here is we're concerned with virtuous conversations, right? And so I've researched what that means. Virtuous conversations are conversations we have in order to understand what we value, but those conversations are often really difficult to keep going. In my research on these conversations, I found that an ideal that consistently comes up is open-mindedness, the virtue of valuing ideas in a way that's not dogmatic or skeptical or gullible, but thinking through reasons and evidence for and against an idea, no matter where it takes you. So open-mindedness to other points of view. Also conscientiousness, or committing to oneself to control what one's saying and what one's doing in a conversation, and just kind of be aware of the subtle actions that we perform when we speak. Also, the most important virtue that comes up in conversations is central to our purpose at Hendrix, the cultivation of empathy, the capacity to take other people's points of view from their point of view and check your own biases and prejudices in order to make room for those other points of view. So I hope we strive towards those virtues of open-mindedness, conscientiousness, and empathy in all our conversations, but especially today. Today we have an opportunity to engage in a conversation about the definition and the value of the liberal arts. And why do we have this conversation? Part of strategic planning at Hendrix College. It happens every 10 to 20 years. And the college collectively reflects on what our values are and then re-envisions a plan for the future. I ask you to recognize that this is an opportunity for you all to engage in that collective imagining. It's happening now and over the next couple of years, but it won't happen again. And so you happen to be here now to be able to participate in it, right? That's true of faculty and students and staff. Also too, I think there's a prospective student who's on campus who's visiting with us to see what Hendrix is like. So we're deeply grateful to Dr. Petersen for being willing to take up time out of your schedule as your president. As the president, we know you're very busy, and to lead the discussion today about defining the liberal arts content, context, and purpose. Please join me in giving President Petersen a warm welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to see so many students in the rooms with us. I really appreciate that introduction as well, because you referenced strategic planning. I think I was originally supposed to do this in December, and I got COVID for the second time in 6 months, and so I had to reschedule, and I'm glad that happened. Not that I got COVID, but that I had to reschedule, because this is a topic on which my thinking is sort of constantly being honed and refined. And I'm going to do a little bit of a brief introduction, and within that I'll embed some sort of rhetorical questions, but then I have kind of a provocative question for you to open up the discussion. It's a question I don't have an answer for, which is actually the only interesting kinds of questions to ask, frankly. And so I am here to hear from you and to have a conversation with you and learn. And I think that actually reflects the values of the SEAL Center and the purpose of this afternoon's conversation. So let me give you a little bit of background, and then I will get to the heart of it all. I am a political scientist, backgrounds in international politics. I'm a faculty member. I've been a faculty member for long enough that I don't remember how long. That I've been an administrator for more than a decade. And in that 10 years, I have dedicated that part of my career to defending, strengthening, and preserving the liberal arts. In doing that, I've spent a lot of time talking about return on investment and thinking about return on investment and value and sort of amassing the empirical evidence for that a liberal education is a good investment. And if you want to sort of, I wouldn't say a shortcut because it's a pretty long book, but if you want some information, Detweiler does a good job with that. But the evidence is overwhelming. In fact, it's so overwhelming, I'm kind of sick of talking about it. Their payoff for a liberal arts education is tremendous for individuals and for society. So I'm going to push that off to the side a little bit today and not spend a lot of time on it. One, because I'm sick of talking about it, because it's so obvious, and two, there's probably not a person in this room who would argue that point. It's just one of those things that you're here, you probably agree that there's value in that. And again, you can read Detweiler's book if you need a little more convincing, or you want a framework for having that discussion with someone else next time they ask you what you're going to do with your English major. Since June, when I arrived here, I've been meeting with Hendrix alumni a lot. Within Arkansas, beyond Arkansas, I have met people in industry of just about every type, in government, in nonprofit sector, in education, whose Hendrix education prepared them to lead lives of accomplishment, service, integrity, and joy, as articulated in our mission statement. It has been a remarkable experience meeting these individuals. And each person I talk to, almost to a person, doesn't talk to me about their major, and they don't really talk about the skills that they learned except for writing. Good writing comes up often, especially for people who have to hire other people. So for the students in the room, all of that sort of torturous exposure that you're getting to learning to write is incredibly valuable, and it is the one skill that does come up. But most of the time, that's not what we talk about. When I talk to someone who graduated 10, 15, 40, 50 years ago, they talk about people. They talk about faculty members, staff members, coaches, whose investment in them, whose mentoring, whose recognition of some kind of spark really changed their life. That comes up all the time. The second thing, and I would say it's probably even more important because it's, in my experience, it's different here. There are great faculty members everywhere. The other thing they talk about that I think makes Hendrix so special are the relationships they have with their peers. It's remarkable to me how many people I meet who have groups of classmates with whom they have such strong relationships, and they're not just economic relationships, they're relationships where these people come from all over the country and get together every year for the last 40 years to go hiking together, to hang out together, because these are their best friends. And those best friends have also been helpful for them, I'm sure, in other ways as well. But that kind of relationship and that ability to build that kind of relationship never happened in any of the educational experiences I had, because I did not have a residential liberal arts experience. I had all kinds of wonderful faculty members and some not so wonderful faculty members over the decade or so it took me to amass my credentials, but I never had that. And I think that is an important attribute of your educational experience that I would say is probably part of a liberal arts experience, but often doesn't make it into the definition. So I've seen plenty of evidence, anecdotal evidence, and meeting with alumni of the value of education, of liberal arts education. As we think about the future of that educational experience, specifically the residential liberal arts, but higher education even in general, we're under a lot of pressure. And I don't think, maybe students are not as aware of this, but certainly there's not a faculty member in this room who doesn't know about the demographic cliff, who doesn't understand the demographic pressures facing higher education as a result of a declining population, but also widening inequality in our society, and what that is doing to the ability of higher education institutions to thrive. We're under tremendous political pressure on various fronts, some of them related, again, to this sort of exhausting argument about return on investment, which no matter how many times we present evidence against it, keeps coming up. Also, some of it about our value to society. Shockingly to me, people now actually see higher education as having a negative effect on society. That is new. That's not happened in the past. That is a huge problem for us. And so as we face these problems, we really have to interrogate what we think it means to be a residential liberal arts college and how we thrive in that environment. And we have to decide what's absolutely fundamental, right? And what needs to change. And what can you change about a college like this and still be considered a residential liberal arts college? I think that's an important question. I don't think that's a question that has an obvious answer. And again, I thought a lot about this, and you should probably know that I'm a bit of a purist kind of snob when it comes to the liberal arts. In a traditional sense, the liberal arts represents a very narrow path to learning and knowledge, right? It's the what you need to be worthy as a free person, what you need to live in a free society. My own discipline would not fit into the traditional definition of the liberal arts. It was really the trivium and quadrivium, the how do you communicate effectively, reason well. I think of this, the second half of that is order, thinking, and curiosity, but it's how you understand the natural world around you. That's what originally the liberal arts, that was the focal point. What did you need to be a free man? Today, when we say liberal arts, we're not generally talking about that traditional definition. We're talking about arts and sciences, which is a whole collection of disciplines that there's some overlap, but there's some difference in that from institution to institution. And I think, probably very few people would argue that the original 7 areas would be a sufficient basis for an education in today's world, even though I think we could have a conversation about whether or not we've done damage to liberal arts by eroding that, but that's probably a different day. What we've done instead in higher education is we have created and broadened that curriculum in pursuit of sort of diversifying the canon, focusing on skills, embracing interdisciplinarity, all of these things that I think are noble and worthwhile pursuits. But they don't necessarily create an educational experience that feels like the liberal arts to me. They often create an educational experience, and that's not a Hendrix thing. This is every institution that I have had an interaction with as a student or an employee. This is true of every one of those institutions, and there are quite a few. That educational experience often ends up feeling really disjointed. And so you leave and you're not really sure what you actually got when you got a liberal arts education. It doesn't feel like it rests on a common foundation. And in some cases, at its absolute worst, the educational experience that we call the liberal arts fails to produce graduates who can reason well, communicate effectively, or even make order out of chaos, which I think is an important attribute from the liberal arts. And it's because colleges have become focused on these other objectives like interdisciplinarity and broadening the canon and skills-based education, which are not in and of themselves bad things, but we no longer have a traditional definition for the liberal arts. If I asked each faculty member here to define the liberal arts, you would probably get different definitions for each person. There would be overlap, but there would be different ways of approaching it, which I think is why Detweiler sort of defaults to this kind of, well, it's this broad content, it's the context in which that happens, and then there's some values attached to that. I think this is a good book. I'm not knocking him, but he gets to that point because we don't actually know what we mean when we say the liberal arts, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it is. So I sort of painted this picture, I hope, and asked a few rhetorical questions. Here's my provocative question, or at least I think it's provocative, but again, I'm kind of boring. I'm an administrator, so maybe it's not. But I've asked this in a couple of other places with faculty members over the last couple of months, and it certainly seems to generate some, I don't know if angst is the right word. So let me just ask you. If I asked you to create an educational experience that prepares people to live lives of accomplishment, integrity, service, and joy as members of a free society, and there was no model for that, you had no idea higher education existed, what would you create? That's the question. And I will go ahead and tell you, I don't think we would create what we have now. Not here at Hendrix, but higher education. So the question, and I will ask it again because it's just for sake of clarity, if I asked you to create an educational experience that prepares people to live lives of accomplishment, integrity, service, and joy as members of a free society, and there was no model for this, you had no idea that higher education existed, what would you create?
Well, I'm glad you asked that in this setting and more generally in settings that's sort of collaborative. Because I think there is not one answer. I think everyone would agree with that. But maybe as a starting point, the group collective imagining is what's important here, not sort of one voice. And not even just this room, right? Like I think it's a multitude of ideas. So let's get them out there.
I don't know, like, full, is my plan, or like, is my structure, but I think, ethics course too, will be something with, Cameroon. I might be a little biased as a philosophy major, but I think ethics are important, and one of the different, theories of ethics, in order to understand, the implications and the consequences of our actions, and also how our actions impact other people in a way that maybe you don't really see. I think with the ethics class, it should either be a discussion class or a discussion class should be separate as well, because I think it's important to hear people's perspectives. I know me in particular, I went to high school where everyone kind of lived in the same area as me, so I wasn't really privy to a lot of these other conversations or other concepts that may be particular to certain cultures or certain economic groups. And I think it's important to have those classes where you can discuss with people and hear what they have to say, and also have it in a constructive environment where someone can kind of guide that conversation to where it's productive and not it's very emotional and just detrimental to progress. In like history, I guess. I think not only our nation's history, but maybe the general history of like I don't know. I don't want to say global history because I feel like it's very vague, but I think it's important to understand again with ethics about like decisions that have been made in the past and how like the effects they had, and understanding those and interpreting those and applying that to ourselves. And I think when you combine those, it helps you add a layer of nuance to your actions, a layer of nuance to the thought processes you have to make decisions. Finally, just like a earth science class, like a environmental studies class, because it goes back to our decisions and how they affect what we do. I feel like we should have a full understanding of who we are like as a people and like the planet we're on, and how to maintain that in a way that not only we can live ethically, but in a way that it's like continue to live on and look out for generations that are going to go on after us.
Okay. You have classes still though. So you know higher education exists in that model. You're still using the same model. It's okay.
Yeah, I feel like classes are important because they give you, like I said, you have to be in. A lot of these conversations that people try to have, it's good. It's good to have them informal sometimes, but when they're informal, I think it leads to a lot of stray ideas and a lot of fallacious logic to a point where it's not constructive. I think having a mediator present and having a place where everyone, not necessarily required to be, but is a common understanding of where they are, I think adds to the interpretation and just like the general openness about accepting the information and being able to understand it to the point where they can apply it to themselves.
I think I have learned from particularly Dr. Pinsky, but some other people too, that everything I want in an educational context can happen in a book group. Talking about a text, we're in a community, we're communicating, reading critical thinking, we're learning about being people in the world, we're talking about the things that we care about, and I feel like every time I've gotten to be in one, I wish my classes were more like that.
I think an emphasis on the why of things, or the why of things rather than the how. I think especially like growing with technology as we advance, anybody can look up things that you may have to memorize in other classes, and instead of emphasizing the memorization, emphasizing why that structure exists and kind of like the different nuances behind it. I think that's what I get most out of my classes that I enjoy, the like why behind things.
It's the difficult question.
Mhm.
That's the interesting part because it's the hard part.
Maybe just to throw a crazy idea out there, that I don't think is that crazy, but it's pretty crazy.
It's a crazy question, so.
Yeah, but I mean, why don't we maybe consider what the implications of dissolving sort of hierarchical structures, like administration, right? Like, what would a bottom-up, student-empowered learning environment look like? You mentioned relationships. What would relationships look like that are not mediated by hierarchy, but are instead bottom-up? Bottom-up, or instead of. Okay, yeah. No, you're good. Kind of petered out at the end.
The question makes me wonder if we're aware of problems that we face without knowing what we need to learn. Right? Like you can be aware of injustice without having to theorize about it sometimes. Right? So maybe like there are problems we face. Do we have to like know higher education exists in order to figure out that climate change is a problem for us? Or like that mental disorder is a problem for us? Or that we have difficulties with empathy, right? Or like I think of it kind of in terms of like, what are the problems we face? And maybe education surrounding these like existential problems, like AI is kind of a big deal. Maybe that's a big problem we face. Or right, inequality is a big deal. Or there are these things that we either always have grappled with, or we're definitely grappling with now. Right, understanding each other, understanding differences. I mean, lots of different ways we could approach what we take to be like sort of non-ideal problems.
I imagine, how do I know that humans have grappled with this, with big ideas and big questions long before higher education existed.
Yeah.
Effectively in some cases, because we're still reading about it. We can't do this, by the way, because we have a higher learning commission that has all kinds of rules for it, so you're safe, right? You can imagine whatever you want. There's rules that will constrain our behavior and force us to have courses and credits and things like that, so you're safe. You could, whatever you suggest to that's out, way outside the box. But the HLC will not let us do it anyway, so. Creativity.
But I mean, also too, I think we have to recognize that like, as we ask the question about what we're gonna do, we have TEC right now, right? Which is the first year seminar that stresses interdisciplinarity. So like you mentioned, our liberal arts, insofar as the first year seminar introduces students to that, it's introducing them to this is about interdisciplinarity. And it used to be something before, and so we have to talk about what it was before, right? When Journeys was a class that was basically driven by multiculturalism in a way. That was its aim to some degree, and that was a change. So whenever we change, we can't just think in a vacuum too. We have to say, this is what we have now, and this is what we used to have, and then that will inevitably inform how people deliberate about what we're going to do.
And I imagine before Journeys, it was great books or something like that.
Yeah.
And then some places are now circling back in their general education curriculum. They've gone through that same process, and they're kind of coming back in some cases to the great books model, maybe with a broader canon, but the same model.
incorporating nature more firmly, more intertwined in the curriculum. So, you know, our science classes are in large part in labs. There's exceptions, obviously, but what would classes look like that don't just talk about nature but are in nature? What would a math class look like that's, you know, going around looking at flower petal arrangements, and you know, there's a lot of sort of things you can do and get outside of like the classroom.
Hello. I think one thing that I find like lacking in my education, or just like I feel like our culture right now in general is this like lack of connection to our bodies and exactly like what it means to have a body and how our position in society are directly like or like our bodily processes. I think that it'd be interesting to think about an education that is considered around individual experience and how our individual experience is a part of our greater communities. I think that like with intellectualism comes a disconnectedness because we are constantly looking at everything through like a lens of all these ideas. And sometimes to know like the truth, I feel like it's just listen to your body and listen to your instinct and your gut. And it's interesting to think about that being involved in education in any way.
I have all kinds of follow-up thoughts and questions I'm not asking on purpose, just so you know, because I've asked you to be creative and I'm not saying anything because I don't want to stop that process. So. I did something crazy as a faculty member. Well, I've done more than one crazy thing, I imagine, as a faculty member, but it's really difficult to break the norms of higher education. It's very difficult, especially as a junior faculty member. But when you look at a system and you see that it's not working, you have two choices. You can play by the rules of that system and just sort of put your head down and ignore that, or you can do different things. So maybe you don't have to throw out the whole structure. Maybe I can walk back my question a couple of steps and just ask you, especially for those of you who are experiencing higher education right now, you don't have all the other context. And you know, unlike the faculty members here, this is your one experience. Like, what parts of that experience are so valuable to you that you would hate to see them go away? And what parts of that experience, and this maybe is where you need a little more courage, do you think really aren't contributing to your growth and development as a human capable of living in a free society, expressing the virtues of our statement of purpose? Maybe if I bring it down to that level, it will.
I mean, I value the intimacy of classes. I think that is, I just get way more out of classes. I'm also a transfer student from Boulder.
Okay.
And so I came from a really big college to a very small college. And I was never really engaged in class before, or I found it very difficult to stay engaged. And now I don't have any problems with that. And so I think just like being able to have a one-on-one with your professor and like have a class discussion is so vital to higher education. And also I think it encourages you to connect outside of class, and like especially here, some classes will meet before tests and just like go over and review notes together, and it's like we may never see each other outside of that setting, but we feel comfortable doing that because it's a 6-person or 10-person class.
Okay, good. Thank you. I can't. I'm sorry, I don't.
I think one thing that I really love is just having professors who will like, I don't know, dare to think outside of the box, and people who are committed to like pushing our thought processes and like stretching ourselves as like far as we can go, you know, in terms of like what we'll consider is the truth. I love professors who like I feel like are very aware of like cultural context. Because I don't know, sometimes I'm like living life and I'm like, wow, I can't know what's going on. So I really appreciate a person who will be honest about that, but also someone who has some sort of pathway, like, I don't know.
What does it look like for a professor to think outside the box?
I think, okay, one time in high school, I had a teacher, and I don't even remember why he did this, but he had us all like close our eyes and then do like weird things, or like do like weird like movements with our bodies in order to like make ourselves feel more comfortable in the classroom. And he asked to do like a bunch of really, really funny, just like goofy stuff that like I think at the time I like used to do. I was like, let's see that. But like just things like that, just like break the formality of education, because I think that the best time that my brain consumes information is when I'm comfortable and when things aren't so tense and uptight.
Okay.
It's like a positive and negative, I guess. I really appreciate like obviously Murphy because I think it provides funding for a lot of experiences and opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be possible, especially while in college. And I look at like projects that some of my peers have done and projects that I see being advertised. And there are the places that I've never even done by going, like experiences that I think it's possible to have. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that obviously Murphy provides funding for people, especially because some people may have these like ideas dreamed up, but not have the resources to actually get there. And I think, especially Hendrix is really good at supporting that in education. But on the flip side of that, I think sometimes it can be a struggle to like understand like implications and understand like the process of like what Murphy and Odyssey. I know for me personally, it felt like I was on the website and I clicked on a link and that would brought me to another link and another link. And and I feel like sometimes like faculty like reference Odyssey, but like a lot of times, especially first years coming in, don't actually understand what Odyssey is for and like the opportunities it can give. So I think while I do appreciate the opportunity of Odyssey, I would also appreciate a little more clarity in terms of like the process of that and how, in particular, how it can be used to like secure fundings and how the IT projects, work projects can be integral to like education and I guess providing an experience that forces you to live outside the box and think outside the box.
What about faculty members who are here?
I'm just thinking about the comment that was just made about formality.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that so many of the increasing requirements, bureaucratic, accreditation related, assessment related, make us be more formal than we would want to be, perhaps. And I feel like that's a real feeling that's grief.
I agree with that. I probably shouldn't say that, but yeah, I've felt that way my entire career. Ruth, were you just seconding that?
I was that and also Rebecca.
Oh, I can't see.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah. Oh, just in listening to everybody's thought and thinking about what words have been repeated, and also kind of meshing that with the thoughts that I've been having this semester about how what we're doing can't be done by AI, because I think that is actually the question we have to be ready to answer. Why go to college when you can type things into ChatGPT? And I think that what's emerging in my thoughts and in this conversation today is that what people value are processes of understanding, exploring, and connecting. And all of those are things that right now, at least ChatGPT can't really do, right? Whether it's through conversation, through books, through connecting with other people, connecting with the world, thinking about our problems or our bodies or our individual experiences. I mean, I feel like, yeah, and that's what I value in classes, right? When we're truly engaged in the processes, not the products, but the processes of coming to understand, that is profound, right? Coming to understand other people or subjects or anything. Exploring, not feeling like we have a definite destination, but that we're experimenting all the time. And we're making connections. We're never doing this alone, whether it's with a book and with the past or with the other people in the room or with the wider world. So I just thought I would share that that's kind of the umbrella that's emerging for me. And it helps me answer the why not ChatGPT, right? Because processes of understanding, exploring, and connecting, that's profound to me. And it's invigorating.
And it's human.
Yeah,
It's
and we
distinctly
do
human.
it.
I mean, I think that's your point about AI not doing this, at least now. I don't know.
Yeah, because we have to all be involved in it, our,
Right.
like our bodies, our emotions, our awareness of other people, our awareness of space, right? It's totally human. And I think that those are the times when I feel most excited in the classroom, and these are the things that are on the forefront of our minds. Even though they can be hard work. Understanding is really hard work, but it can still be exciting.
And it changes. Right, I mean, the understanding it's not a destination, it is a process and it changes. And the point, I think, partly of what you're doing here is learning how to understand. You know, learning how to be a person who can continue to do that for the rest of your life. But there are parts of what we do that aren't necessarily conducive to that. Some of it is bureaucratic nonsense, frankly, that we are forced to do, and some of it, I think, reflects structures that we've built that maybe aren't perhaps conducive to human enterprise, like connecting, understanding, and exploring. I hate grading. I think it's ridiculous. I hate exams. I think they're ridiculous. I'm allowed to say that, I guess. Because I'm not teaching a class right now, and not 500 people aren't going to try to sign up because I hate grading and I hate exams. But I've never found that to be a particularly useful enterprise. But it's what we do. It's part of the structures we build. It's higher education. And when you start breaking those norms, it makes people uncomfortable. Much less role playing and all kinds of other crazy things that we do. True?
I'm gonna follow up on that, and I say, hey, I don't like grading either.
Yeah.
So I am teaching.
Yeah.
Part of that because it's very difficult to define at times. I mean, I teach language, but also content. Language is slightly easier because it's about functionality, but it still can be worked in different ways outside the box. And by not thinking that it's an assignment once you get a score that say you're done, I like to think that there is a possibility for growth and revisit, and that is the learning process that I want my students to get.
Right.
I try to change slightly my approach to grading. Yes, specifications, all these fancy new structures, but I try to do it in a way that is organic and that promotes thinking processes, exploring that kind of collective or at least collaboration approach to learning. But one of the things that I think that I'm trying to think more about outside the box and about the meaning of why should students in general come to get a degree is what am I trying to teach them in class? What am I trying to do in the classroom? What is the end goal? And I'm trying to do a lot of the conversations. I'm trying to engage and help them to provide what we say tools that they will be able or we will be able to extrapolate outside the classroom. I think that one of the things that tends to annoy me a little bit is the idea of the classroom as outside the world. No, the classroom is another part of that world. The world is still there. And we'll bring it inside the classroom, and the idea is what can we take something outside of the help them continue with that moving forward with the idea of the lifelong learning approach, right? And so regarding going back to grading, one of the things that I've been thinking is like, what do I want them to do? Is that an exam? Is that an exam a defining element of the learning that has been done in the course? Not really. Trying to do all the things that students can engage with, that they produce, and I don't like the idea of production because it goes suddenly with the idea of being productive, providing a product. I don't think so much of a product, but something that comes out from what they're learning that they can convey, again, in a very conversational manner. Why am I thinking like that? In part, here, the foreigner in me did not have access to the liberal arts model that I'm experiencing as a faculty member. When I was going to university, I was hoping to see something that I had only seen on TV. Guess what? It was American shows. So my disappointment was massive when I got to the university, and it looked nothing that anything that I saw ever on the screen. So what was I expecting? I was expecting to have conversation. I was expecting to sit in a seminar and just think out loud my thoughts about what we have read and listen to other people to see what they have seen in the world in order to understand myself through that kind of process. And I did not fully find that there. I had to go to the place, maybe in a book club, but I never really participated in a book club. But it was in other groups in which there were conversations. So I think, again, thinking outside the box is not so much about destroying a system that's in place, but trying to make it work in the demands that we're feeling today. And especially, I think that I second and agree that there are certain structures in place that make the role of the faculty member really hard to do something that is more exciting, more engaging, and more rewarding, that has value because of what we are expected to and perform or accomplish at the end. I'm trying to think of productivity quotas or how many people you have, but how many people are getting A's. Is it D's actually a bad grade in D? You know, like when we're talking about grading. And so I'm seeing a potential to think outside the box. I'm always, again, trying to think how that can translate in a way that can put into value the liberal arts model of education. I definitely see, as someone who did not experience it, I definitely see the benefits and wonders that do in the students. It's something marvelous. And I think that it should be something to continue advocating for because it has so much potential. However, how can we make it work in a society or in societies, plural, in which liberal arts education and this particular model is being seen in a negative lens as not contributing to anything and potentially being replaced by a machine that, by the way, was designed by a person who did have access to liberal arts education. So I don't know the irony. Or it was too many of it.
No, I was just, I was thinking about your experience because the liberal arts higher education experience really does kind of have this American genesis kind of connotation. It's a very different way of doing higher education, and the irony to me is that we have built a fantastic higher education infrastructure here, and we are just dismantling it brick by brick by brick. While at the same time, I was in India a few years ago. It was before COVID, so I guess it's a few years. And they are actually a massive country, way more demand for higher education than there is supply. And they are trying to build liberal arts institutions, right? China is in very small ways trying to sort of reform some of their educational experience because they recognize that what they built, which is this skills-based educational system, very technical, is actually not what they need. What they need is a liberal arts model. And over here on this side of the world, we're dismantling the structure. And I don't actually know what to make of that other than to be sad. But yeah, it is a unique, and I would argue incredibly effective model for education. The liberal arts, not necessarily the structures that we put in place, which I sometimes have issues with.
I guess sometimes in these conversations, I think it's important to like give a reminder that the residential liberal arts colleges do like many different things, right? So like in terms of there's great books, schools like St. John's and Santa Fe and they're mostly great books. And then there's open curriculum, liberal arts colleges, where there are no required courses, right? And there are liberal arts colleges that are open curriculum and like no majors, right? And there are some that don't have grades. And so there's this sense in which I think there are limitations with, assessment and
Right.
moving forward, but there's a sense in which in our envisioning, we don't need to think that like we can look at other models and say, wait, even if they don't have majors and don't have requirements, and don't have general ed, and there's no first year seminar, could it still be a liberal arts college? And the answer is yes, since they are liberal arts colleges, right? So we don't have to like worry about that in a sense as we imagine it, except insofar as there are those limitations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense, and that makes me wonder something else when I follow that.
Yeah.
So you have those examples where you have St. John's, which is very much that sort of model, not conservative in the political way, but conservative in the sort of traditional liberal arts way. And then you have these kind of freewheeling institutional models where you might not even have a major, much less a general education requirement. And then you have 90% of the rest of the institutions that are somewhere in the middle of that, and that includes this one. And oftentimes when I see things that are somewhere in the middle of that, I think, and this is not just about Hendrix or liberal arts even, I think, do you just not really get an ideal outcome when you're trying to, there's some bureaucratic things that lead to this, like with curriculum, you have something and then you want something else and you never take anything away, you just keep adding things, and all of a sudden you have something that's totally unrecognizable and no one knows what it is. No one can tell you why you do it, and everyone has forgotten or died who had anything to do with that decision. And students get here, and we're trying to talk to you about what courses you should take, and I couldn't do it here because I'm never advised here. But even at other institutions where I was a faculty member, I had a hard time justifying or explaining those things because they weren't the product of thought. They were the product of processes that just kind of never get dealt with. So I don't know, like it kind of brings me back to the original question. If you were to do this and start right at the beginning with a completely clean slate, what would you do if you wanted to achieve the outcome that we say in our statement of purpose we want?
I wanted to respond at the very beginning, and I don't want to be the faculty's frequency. Conversation. One of the things that I learned, and again, I know it was in an academic setting, I was always fascinated by the agora and the Greek and the foreign, and it was all conversational on how much through questioning and discussion and wrestling with ideas without the goal of having a solution at the end, because sometimes it's not so much about the end product, forgive me for using that word again, but it's more about the process and exploration and having to consider those different possibilities. What I would like to see, that's what I was hoping to see when I went to my institution back in Spain, which I did find through some professors who broke the rule and were not interested in doing exams for a grade, but who want us to push us for developing that critical thinking. And that's how I eventually continued this path. That was inspiring. And so the model I will have is that conversational. It's collective. It brings community together. So we live in communities, not only here on campus, but outside campus. And that's what I will love to see. People talking to other people who then talk to other people. As simple as that. To continue pass along knowledge.
Yeah, please, I cannot see what's happening back there.
Yeah, the AI piece has helped me think through this because I really think about this a lot. I mean, one of the things that I think that I don't know which question I'm answering at this point, but one of the things that I've kind of learned to think about and really kind of articulate or starting to articulate more explicitly as a course goal is just changing your mind. Not even changing your opinion, but embracing the process of here's what I think I want to say today, and on Thursday it's going to be completely different. So just sort of embracing the fact that we have to change every day. in the larger world, there's an expectation to know, and I think that AI knows, but I think humans speak. And I think that that space is really, it's sacred space. And I think it only becomes that if students can give that to each other, and if we can give that to our students.
I think part of the premise of changing your mind is intellectual humility. The recognition that what I think today might not actually be accurate, or it might be appropriate today, and in 6 months it might not be. So one of the iterations of this conversation, which I threw out this morning, actually, decided to go a different direction, was by broadening the scope of what we mean when we say liberal arts, so that the great books and everything in the spectrum just counts as liberal arts. Have we done some damage to the purpose of a liberal education? Because there is no shared liberal education, and even in an institution like this, that is, I think, much more traditional than I'm even used to, even though it's not sort of St. John's traditional, there's still not, I don't really see that there's a shared intellectual experience amongst the student body because of the curriculum. And then when I look at society and I look at people who are sensibly educated people, I don't see a lot of intellectual humility. I don't see that anymore, and I wonder if we did that, we higher education. And when I see faculty members who don't possess that trait, I wonder, is that the problem? Is that what we've done? And then we are going to perpetuate that because we have PhDs and we're trained and we're lacking that. That was my original. But I thought, that's probably too much. But I didn't bring it up.
I think one question that we're kind of dancing around is when we ask the question about the value of the liberal arts, we need to also ask the question about the value of humanities. And I think that's something that also feels, at least to me, connected. That people trash the humanities in America as being valuable, especially philosophy, and a little wounded by it.
They're wrong.
But yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to see that there's that connection, and then to see what the forces are that have made that the case, because we could say we also value natural sciences and social sciences and the humanities, and we may need to reflect a little bit more on that. And I think it's also just for me, I teach stuff on AI, my classes, and the things that people say computers couldn't do are often things that are intellectual, like rational and self-conscious, and reflect on things and have cognition and solve problems. And it turns out over time, computers can do that. Mm-hmm. The things they can't do involve the body and involve, perception of each other and recognition and, things that are more subtle and require conversation and can't be put into boxes and can't be categorized, and right, the things that are difficult and complex and ambiguous, and right. So I think that's also important to recognize, that we're sort of seeing in ourselves a change in what we mean for it to be human, for us to be human. And so as we do that through thinking about AI, we also have to think about what do we value? And I think the humanities it's not distinctively doing that, but I think that's an important question to bring up. Yeah.
Maybe it isn't the only place that happens, maybe. I might say it, on the other hand, I think it is probably the place that happens. Just based on my own educational experience, where that I'm a political scientist. It wasn't politics, right? It was a Department of Political Science for a reason, and we were actively discouraged. This is in grad school, not undergrad, from pursuing any coursework in the humanities or any coursework in political theory or political philosophy because it was not consistent with where the discipline was going. It was a disservice to me and to my colleagues. And so, I'm a social scientist, and I was against my own will in some cases, sort of trained to be a quantitative social scientist. I would not get from those educational experiences the things you just talked about. They're incredibly value neutral experiences. They're not human experiences. They are experiences that rely solely on empirical evidence. Even to determine which questions are worth asking, only the questions where you can measure the variables are actually worth asking. That's not education, but that is a lot of what we do. And I have value in evidence and empirical evidence, and I use it all the time. But absent the humanities, it's pointless, it's soulless, and it can be done by a machine. And anyway, I'm on a soapbox, I'll stop.
I'm just realizing that I have a kind of suspicion. And the suspicion is that when you pile bureaucratic requirements and when you reify things, it can be a sign of fear. And one of the things that I think our culture in general fears is intellectual humility. I think it doesn't want a whole bunch of people who are willing to step back from their statements and think or have real conversations. I think that's a threat to power and the way it works. And I think there's lots of reasons why we sound crazy if we start to talk like that would be a great thing.
I suppose if I'm running for office, I don't want you to think, right? Like, I want you to have a set of ideals, and I suppose. But beyond, I guess because we've politicized every aspect of our lives now, that has infiltrated everything about us, and all of our relationships and all of our interactions are now sort of beholden to this two-party logic.
Two-party, big money, right? Power and enhanced view system. What we don't want is people really thoughtful and reflective. We want people closed, we want them rigid, we want them sure.
But we've done a good job if that's what we want.
I would like to connect on idea and pick up with something that Jim was saying, which is the values of humanities and how much that it is so connected is to the idea of the liberal arts in itself. My question is one of accessibility. Who's going to have access to that if we undo and disinvest and eliminate humanities programs? It's going to be very limited to those who have access and go to other institutions. It becomes then an option that is not accessible to the broader community. That of exploring, that of thinking. And it goes back again to the idea of power. Is disempowering people and not allowing them to grow as learners and grow as critical thinkers. So again, a lot of the resistance that I tend to see is someone who works within the humanities is always wishy-washy. You can learn that languages. Duolingo, for sure. I actually don't encourage people to use Duolingo. It's an interesting tool, but there is much more than that. Than just, to me, that is like the workout that you do in the gym. And I always use this metaphor. You go to the gym and you start lifting weights, increase the weight, but then that has to be also implemented, applied in another context, maybe to let's run a race together and we train as a team. So I'm not disengaging or not considering the applications of other things, but the humanities have a purpose within an educational system. And seeing constantly the threat of closing specific departments that tend to follow or to be under the purview of the humanities. To me, my question is, who is this benefiting and where is going to be then accessible? And I kind of stop thinking about the lack of accessibility and the elitism. And again, it goes back to the idea of intellectual humility. I do agree that there is a bit of an issue and on the academic side of it, on the faculty department, the students are not less involved.
If you look at the people who rail against the humanities, the elites who rail against the humanities, look at where they sent their kids to school. What's happening is a dismantling of the liberal arts and the humanities, but the liberal arts in institutions across the country, within larger institutions, but also the closing of colleges of liberal arts in the center of the country. And that means that only the elites will have access to this. And that reinforces a system that is already teetering on the brink. This is why it's become my crusade, if you will, this sort of defense of the liberal arts, is because I can't stand the thought of living in a society where only the children of the elite have access to an educational experience like this. It's not acceptable, and it will not be good for our country when that happens. And I'm not sure we can stop it, but I'm gonna do everything I can to slow it down.
Well, thank you, Dr. Petersen,
Thank you.
for leading our discussion today, and thank you everyone for coming. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. Next week, the discussion will be led by Dr. Tom Briggs, who's a political scientist in international relations and political theory. It'll be on, is a democratic foreign policy possible? So please join us next week for that discussion. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you
for
so
the
much.
great ideas.
It's okay.